the experience as I've had it subjectively is still one where I am still doing everything. And it's actually very matter of fact and very, very gentle. And it's surprising that something so gentle could bind you into that place.
Welcome to the Navya Hypnosis podcast, where we explore hypnosis as a powerful tool for mental health and well-being. Dive into its mysteries, hear success stories, and discover how hypnosis can transform our minds. I'm Brad, your host. I'm joined today by,
This is Shalom. I'm excited to be here.
let's begin this enlightening journey together. Shalom,
Amazing.
how are you doing today?
Doing great, Brad. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, totally. This is going to be amazing.
Yes, it's going to be a
So
lot of fun.
let's dive right in, just like you said, into hypnosis.
Yeah.
I'm really coming at an angle of ignorance. Like, I don't really understand what hypnosis is or why we would choose hypnosis. Sort of like my entire paradigm for understanding hypnosis is, old timey movies and this sort of antiquated, clips from Sherlock Holmes of hypnosis, right? So like, dive in there for us. I'd be really curious, just what is hypnosis to you?
Yeah. So hypnosis, the technical definition, that is quite, the standardized definition. There's no real standard, but this is a common definition. It is a state of focus. It is a state of focused awareness, where if you think about how we're going through the day, typically we're kind of all over the place and we're very analytical. So we're processing a lot of data and making sense of it at a given moment. Well, hypnosis is a different mindset where your brain is in a place where you're focusing on one specific thing. And apparently, as we can see, is that when you're doing that, like magical things happen, right? There's just a completely different types of experiences start to emerge when you enter this sort of calm, focused state. Actually, it isn't always calm, but that's one of the best ways to get there. But this focused state of awareness and what happens next after it is a very powerful tool for many things, personal growth being the top of the list, which is probably most of what we're going to discuss today. Um, the thing with
I'm actually,
hypnosis is, sorry?
I'm actually interested. Hop in
Yeah,
there for a second. Like you
yeah,
said something really interesting about that, so it's focused thought, but then it's not always calm. Like it's calm and then not always calm. It varies, which
yeah.
probably
So
is related to that question of personal growth a lot, right?
exactly. So the way a very common way to get somebody into hypnosis is to do, and this is the most common way that I do it, is, for example, progressive relaxation. So you relax the body, and that shows the mind that it can relax as well, and a person naturally enters a this relaxed state and enters a state of focus. But there are other ways to get there. There's ways to get into this hypnosis, state of focus quite quickly. It doesn't require a long relaxation process. And there are times when you might want the 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 person being hypnotized, to not necessarily be completely calm. Maybe you want them to be, in a state of general focus where they're going to perform. Maybe they're an athlete, right? And they're about to run down the track, and they're trying to get into this focus place, but they're not going to be relaxing on some couch somewhere, but rather they're in a focused state of high performance, right? So you could actually take that
Interesting.
state of focused mind and use it in a variety of applications. I think in a therapeutic setting, you might find that often, not always, but often, maybe a state of calm is a good place for people to be, especially if, the presenting issue might be something around anxiety or fears, which a lot of us have and we're struggling with. But at times, maybe you're trying to get out of a funk. Maybe it's a bit more of a depression vibe and you're trying to get back into that state of action and empowerment. You could be in a focused state, but really kind of come out energized. And maybe you're emerging after the session, not needing a nap, but feeling like you're ready to take on the world.
That's fascinating. So it is the state, like the state of consciousness much
Yeah,
more. And that's a
exactly.
fascinating example. Like you don't necessarily think of an athlete, right? And like when
Yeah,
you're thinking of it makes total sense. Like the minute
exactly.
you say it. but it's just like, so it's really hypnosis at the core is more this question of like a particular state that you're putting yourself into.
Exactly. Exactly. A state that your mind is in. And it speaks sports hypnosis is a huge field, and it's fascinating.
Huh.
And the big athletes are all working with mindset coaches. They've got a team around them. They've got their nutritionists, but they've also got their people who help them with their mindset, so that when the crowd is cheering and screaming and stuff like that, they're able to still drop into some sort of place where they can tune everything else out and just focus on what that moment needs. So it is a very powerful tool that you can tap into and use.
Interesting. Okay, so that totally expands my what I have classically thought of as hypnosis, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's really like the maintaining or controlling your own focus, it sounds like, right? Which is something that athletes are important, but then there's a lot of benefits to doing that within the context of self-growth, I imagine, right? It's
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
there's some correlation there that's like interesting, right? Between like, well, what is an athlete trying to do to perform at their highest, right? And at the same place, there's like this mental state that can provide a lot of benefit on the personal growth side. Like, what is that? Like, talk a little bit deeper about that.
Exactly. I mean, the first thing that came to mind as you were saying that is that it's just another form of performance in a way, right? So the athlete's trying to get,
So,
a ball down the court as quickly as possible. But metaphorically, aren't we all trying to get some sort of ball or many balls down many courts in life? And so that same tool that is serving them might be serving us in other ways. But at the way we're doing a similar thing, we're trying to achieve our best level of performance. And one thing that I like to remind people of, or yeah, remind or teach people that, especially if there's concerns about hypnosis, it seems foreign to them, they've never done it before, that we enter a state of hypnosis multiple times a day naturally. It's something that happens to us. It's the state that we might be familiar with from when you're just waking up in the morning and you're still half asleep, or the state of when you are just falling asleep at night. There's two terms, hypnagogic and hypnopopic, which is interesting. Terms specifically for those states of about to fall asleep or just waking up. There's something called highway hypnosis when you're driving down the road and your mind is wandering because it's just super straight and all you got is those lampposts. And 20 minutes pass and you realize, I don't know quite know what happened during these 20 minutes.
right.
That type of mind wandering state is a state of trance. And
Huh.
the difference here is that we're learning to deliberately control it. We're inducing it when we want it, and we're using it to our advantage. It's a state that the brain oftentimes enters on its own. As I don't know if we know why it does that necessarily. There's a commonly referred to, brainwave states of alpha, delta, and stuff like that. So it seems our brain needs to cycle through different states for different purposes, maybe for its own health or to help us deal with different things that present themselves in life. But if we can channel that and learn how to use that, and that's where uh, doing hypnosis with another person or self hypnosis can really come into play and help us use it to our advantage.
Fascinating. So it's not tapping in to something that is foreign to you. I mean, it's really like, when you mention that state of driving on the highway, right? And sort of going into this trance like state, like, okay, obviously, like I can totally resonate with that. I think we've all been there. We've all had that experience. I would not have previously associated that with hypnosis. Like, that's really interesting. What is it about that state? Like, do we know what makes that state a really good state for diving into ourselves and for working on our past or on fears that we're facing?
It's a good question. I'm not an expert on what the brain state, the neurological side of it all. Um, I believe it has to do with the I guess the brain state or the brain waves at where they're at when you do that thing. But I will speak to the fact that one of the most interesting, I think, things that I relate to in the world in hypnosis is just how familiar it is. It's just how almost matter of fact this state of being is. It feels so, wait, I was just in one place 1 second, and now I'm in this other place now. And it feels like a variation of my daily existence. And I remember even fairly recently, and I've been doing hypnosis for 10 years, but I recently did a hypnosis training. And so ended up being hypnotized by somebody that wasn't myself or someone that I've trained, and noticing how I was expecting, especially with hypnosis and how you see it on stage and stuff like that, a certain amount of like power. I expected to feel a little hand inside my brain, kind of like guiding me towards X over Y. Just you're gonna do this instead of that.
Totally.
A little bit of that sort of external um, force, because at the end of the day, that's still so how it's presented. Like there's
Right.
two
That's
types of
the way
hypnosis.
we picture it all the time, right? It's like
Exactly.
entirely
The
yeah.
stage hypnosis, and
Yeah.
there's two types of hypnotic language typically. One is indirect, where I invite you, like you might find yourself relaxing now. Another one is direct. So just go ahead and close your eyes and drop it, like that kind of very direct language. So I figured that direct language is going to sound like an order to my subconscious mind, and then I'm going to do this thing. But it's not like that. The experience as I've had it subjectively is still one where I am still doing everything. And it's actually very matter of fact and very, very gentle. And it's surprising that something so gentle could bind you into that place. So there's this test that we do, for example, to keep your eyelids shut. We say your eyelids just got so relaxed that you can't even open them without having to put in additional effort. And then you try to open your eyelids and you can't, right? And so that it's very hard to describe, but that state
Mhm.
of being in a place where you can't open your eyelids, it's not like, oh my God, someone super glued my eyelids shut. It's actually a feeling of like, well, I'm so relaxed right now. The instructions are that I can't open my eyes. So I can't.
Like what?
And
Yeah.
it's, yeah. So like, why would I? Because I'm so relaxed, right?
Yeah.
That's really what it is. And so as soon as the thing is removed, instantly you just open your eyes again. And I think that's what makes it so different from being in and experiencing it versus like watching it happen on stage. You're watching it on stage, it seems like the guy's a puppet at the hands of a master. But when you're there, you're realizing there's a person who's dropped into this spontaneous type of like, I'm gonna just, you know, do what I'm told. Maybe that's forgetting my name, because
Mhm.
part of us knows that experience of like, oh, it's on my tip of my tongue, but I can't remember. I'm like, I can't. And so even that, like, is things that play with memory, which is one of the fascinating things that hypnosis can control. That's something that you can almost imagine. I'm going to relax so much right now that I'm just kind of blank out. I'm going to blank out and I'm not going to remember my own name for a second.
Yeah.
Just how blinked out I'm going to get. And we're able to do that actually really easily, but it does not feel like force. And that's what's fascinating about it.
That is fascinating because that's not at all the image, right? You get from like movies and all this other stuff. I mean, you constantly think about hypnosis. It's like, oh my gosh, they're hypnotizing somebody to do some crime or something like that. Right. And
Yeah,
obviously, like, it doesn't sound like that at all. I mean, it sounds like something significantly more familiar
yeah,
than
exactly.
like sort of that weird, um, imaginary, I guess, thing
Yeah,
that we sort of created in culture of this idea of what hypnosis is
exactly.
as a state. What is the role of the therapist in that? That I'm getting the impression that like the role of the therapist in that is one of nearly, is it more of a guide? Is it, how do you see yourself as along this journey?
That's a great question. And actually, I'll preface by saying that even the terminology, therapist, hypnotist, or hypnotherapist, that itself is a bit of a, we can unpack that further
Mm,
because there's a whole spectrum there. Therapist is oftentimes a regulated term in a
mm,
lot of, in probably every state in the United States and parts of Canada, which is fascinating in its own right. And then, therefore, hypnotherapist gets a little bit um, of a gray area because it's got the word therapist in it, but hypno's right there. And then hypnotist is, I guess, the most neutral and the most open, and it's more on the spectrum of like life coach. pretty much anybody can actually call themselves that. Um, and so I'm going to use the term hypnotist just because it casts the widest range with while still being, um, I guess, acceptable. And it will say that, oftentimes for me, hypnotist still means, in a therapeutic setting. It could be on stage, but we're talking about a therapeutic setting. So the role of a hypnotist in a hypnosis session is very interesting one, because we have this rule that says all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. And this is a very important thing as we're trying to alleviate these misconceptions around mind control. It's that any suggestion that I make as the hypnotist is going to pass through the filter of your own ears and then your mind. It's an auditory experience. And you're going to say to yourself, does this fit for me or do I not? And then you either accept it or reject it. Now, the average suggestion from the average person might sit well with you and you'll do it. But there could easily be a thing that you just disregard. And it's a gentle disregard. It's like it like passes over you. This is not fitting for me, so I'm just not going to do it. Which, by the way, makes a wide margin of error for a hypnotist. I could give you a sentence and it's got 3 different instructions in it, and 2 of them don't land and 1 of them does. And that's the part that resonates and you go along with that. So a lot of times
Yes.
we'll deliberately sprinkle in different terminologies or different styles of language because different ones might resonate with different people. So we'll add variety on purpose because different brains are attracted to different things. Um, the hypnotist in the beginning is doing a very important role of education, right? We're showing you some sometimes very simple things, but it's something you didn't know how to do. And so just learning that is a key step. And a lot of times that's a huge part of what we're doing is we're teaching you how to take this from the session to the real world. You can do this
Huge.
now yourself. And that is hopefully an important part of what is being done. And that's always my goal with clients I work with. They should start creating these habits and these ways of being that they become more and more natural to them that they can bring. But another layer, which is fascinating, is that working with an external hypnotist as opposed to hypnotizing yourself does lead to deeper states. And I give this to the analogy of like a car and a driver. Like you're always in control. So you're the driver, you've got the steering wheel. I'm the navigator and I'm sitting beside you and I'm saying, hey, do you want to go over to the left there? It looks like an
Mhm.
interesting spot. And you can either choose to turn it to the left or not. And what that does is it creates the ability for you to drop into that highway hypnosis type of vibe. You don't have to be worried about anything because there's a bit of a paradox that goes on. If you're trying to hypnotize yourself and you're in the state of just focus, like in the moment, in the zone kind of thing,
Yeah.
the need to then navigate that and say, well, where do I go next? And I'm getting stuck. What should I do? Is a different mindset. It's like that is the problem solving part. That is the classic analytical. Should
Oh,
we do
yeah.
A or A or B? So there's a bit of a paradox happening as you try to do self hypnosis. You're all relaxed. You're in the moment. You're just accepting what is as it arises. And then there's a part of you that needs to navigate that. So handing that off to somebody else means you can drop in that much deeper because you don't need to worry about anything. There is somebody else here right now who creates that container, who validates whatever's coming up, and they're in charge of deciding what happens next. And the ability to hand off what happens next to somebody else allows the experience to go that much deeper. So that's the value of a hypnotist. It's almost like in the world of coaching, you don't need to necessarily be the world's expert. You need to be good at
Mhm.
creating that container and asking the right questions. So the hypnotist as a guide, they need to be here to take the control, the decision making responsibilities off of the subject, so they can just drop in completely.
That's really interesting. It reminds me of this in language learning. There is this concept that as people learn a language, there's sort of 2 skills that they have to work on. Or there's 2 activity types. There's sort of like the language itself, understanding the language, speaking the language. But then there's this other, what they call monitor that is going on sort of, and it's happening, you know, always within our heads is like, does it make sense what I just said? Right? Like, how does that match up with the rules of grammar or the various rules that I've learned throughout my life of how to speak properly? And that's one of the really challenging things for beginners in a language, right? Is because they're trying to manage those 2 states of that flowing with the language right? What we call fluency, right? They're trying to get to that. But at the same time, they've got a lot of this monitor process going on in the back of their head, which is sort of, they're using to try and gauge, oh, wait, am I saying that properly? Like how, how's this working in a sentence? Do I sound foolish? And what I'm hearing there is that is like, it's really interesting that you said how to do it, right? There's a particular focus nearly on like the practice on getting the skill in that same way as that monitor where your goal is not to, it sounds like your goal is not to make somebody dependent always on the hypnotist. It is for the hypnotist to help act as that monitor, that guy, the sort of the taking away that anxiety of figuring out, oh, what do I do next? And then that plays a critical role sort of in that path of moving through, I would imagine, the various stages of mastery of hypnosis. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Like, am I getting that close?
I love that analogy. You're reminding me in my own life. I'm bilingual. I grew up in Israel, and so my first language is English, even though I was in Israel, and my second language was Hebrew, which I picked up starting in kindergarten. And I never achieved what I felt like was complete fluency. I have a very good command of the language. I'm realizing as you were describing this right now, as my monitor in Hebrew is very present still. There's a part of me that's looking along from the side and being like, that sounds stupid. That accent is
Yeah.
stupid, and that can't possibly be the way to say it, even though it is. It's just this unusual situation where I'm very fluent, but still have that very vocal monitor. So I think that speaks really well to here too. There's the part that's trying to do things right and analyzing if you're doing it right, and the flip side, if you bring in fluency as the goal, there is a fluency to all of this world. And it actually involves a lot of what I feel is emotional intelligence practices. It's not really fluency
So,
about hypnosis, at least in the process that I do with people. It's a fluency of how do I interact with my own emotions and my emotional world, with hypnosis being the baseline of that. Because if I'm in a state of hypnosis and I navigate my internal emotional structures in a fluent way, then I don't need to have the monitor saying, does this desire make sense? Am I allowed to feel this right now? Those kinds of things that we're so often doing to ourselves and might tend to do even in hypnosis in the beginning. That is the skill that I hope to impart on people, that they are able. And I can say this with myself. I'm more experienced, and I actually trained a cohort of therapists actually recently. Um, and I demonstrated on myself. So they were very new. I would sit in front of them. I was the subject. But because I was so skilled, they needed to do very little other than create that very broad context that, like, I'm here, I'm listening to you. This is a space for you to sort of almost monologue. And I would do so much of the work myself because I was very comfortable in that space. And I can see this even with clients that I'm working with over just a few sessions. The third session in, the client is doing more of the work by themselves, and I am becoming more and more passive in this container space creating role that allows them to act in that place and discover and explore. And so I love that. I'm so excited about that type of thing where the client ends up empowered for life of how they navigate their
yeah.
own world. I heard this term once. A client of mine, I'm very grateful for the work we did together. And she said to me, "You've become a voice in my head." And this is speaking as much to the therapeutic part, those points, those lessons that, I tried to impart, or the principles I tried to impart. And I think this is true for any therapist, a mental health professional. I've hopefully become a voice of positivity in their head that reminds them, at least initially, externally. It's a different than everything they've known, right? They've gone through 25 years of their life doing X. Along comes up an external being that says, hey, Y is perfectly okay to be. And that starts out completely externally and eventually enters and becomes a voice in their own head, which is what we want. It's an adaptive and improved way of being that we need to almost learn. Hypnosis, by the way, is one of the best ways to quickly become a voice in someone's head.
But you said something there that's really interesting, which is picturing hypnosis as a tool in order to do other things,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yeah.
that's why, as opposed to like the state in and of itself, maybe there is a certain uh, calm enjoyment with this, but it really sounds like the true power of it is once you are there, once you know how to use this tool, there's it's realizing that maybe that voice that has been going on in your head about self-doubt and anxiety for years and years and years, maybe you can start to have a different relationship with that voice. Am I understanding that properly?
The way I
Is
would
that how you
define
sort
it
of
is,
do it, or?
yeah, the maybe I should have a different relationship with that voice. That's something that almost every therapist will suggest to you, right? They'll be
Okay.
like, so that comes up a lot in the broad range of the entire personal growth or self help or mental health approach. Is almost everybody will point out that there's a better way of being than you currently are, right? That's why you've
Mm.
come to see whoever the person is.
Hmm.
What I feel hypnosis is so powerful is that, and this is usually how I start the entire intro to hypnosis, is that we all intellectually can understand that there's better ways of being than we currently are. Yet usually we're still stuck in the problem. We're still very much grappling
Yeah.
with those things sometimes for years. And the reason for that is because the tools or the mindset or the place we use the again going back to sports, which is funny because I'm not very into sports, but the arena, the field in which we're usually playing is one that is not very conducive to change. It's conducive to survival or status
Mhm.
quo, getting through the day, and it involves a lot of overanalyzing, a lot of like, well, I should do this, and beating yourself up, and repetition, endless repetition. If I just do this, and it doesn't really get us very far a lot of the times. And that's why even I'm a bit critical of the conventional way therapy is done. You might go to a therapist for years because you're waiting for either new ways of being to trickle down or new insights about what's really going on to trickle up. And it's passing through a filter of the conscious mind that is very analytical and takes a very long time for that stuff to surface. Whereas hypnosis, exactly as you described, it's a tool, it's a state. And the state is very powerful and for a variety of applications. One of the best, in my opinion, is being personal growth. And there's two parts to that, as I see it. There is the bringing up of things that are going on inside you, insight. And that's a huge part. People oftentimes come and they want to know why. Why am I acting this way for so many years in such an illogical fashion? Hypnosis can get you your why extremely quickly. Other people don't necessarily, you don't need a why to change. It could be for reasons unknown, you've now moved on. And that's the new behaviors and new ways of thinking or feeling. And that can be introduced very quickly. And I'll give you an example of that. I was already trained in hypnosis for a few years and started working with different mental health professionals on my own personal growth journey. I worked with a life coach who was life changing for me. Really loved the work I did with him. He was very psychologically oriented. So he would give the psychology behind the advice and the suggestions. And he really helped me actually with my social integration. But I felt like I wanted what he was telling me in the sessions to go deeper. I would put myself into trance by myself while he
Hmm.
spoke to me. And I would deliberately have him like have the words wash over me in a way that felt for me like it was going deeper down. I would open up my subconscious as a metaphor and I would have him speak right to that part so that I didn't have to think about, does it make sense what he's saying? As opposed to, this is about somebody I trust. And I'm going to let those words just kind of drop deeper down. And I stand by that. And I would be sitting there in front of him with my eyes closed. So I was doing the state creation in that way,
Mhm.
using it as a tool to tap into what he was giving me. It can be used similarly in learning, and it could be used even for adventures. This is a total tangent, but there's a very fascinating space called erotic hypnosis, where a couple might explore getting into a hypnotic state and doing all sorts of playtime stuff with each other.
Huh.
It involves the mind, which a lot of people will tell you, sexologists will tell you is the biggest erogenous zone. So if you
Mhm.
can tap into it in a more creative and spontaneous way, amazing things can happen. It just speaks to that point that hypnosis is a state. It's a state that you can enter, and what you do in that place um, is open to interpretation. And I tell that to clients, like, we're going to do the following in a session. First, we're going to do an induction. That's the part where you enter hypnosis, like the progressive relaxation, but some of those can be almost instantaneous. And now you're in hypnosis. And then we're going to do a few minutes of resource building, which helps you get into like a positive mental state. And then we're going to do the work, which is the process, the therapeutic part of the work. Now, the work is the part that is most unique to Navya and my hypnotherapy clinic, what I call hypnosis assisted healing. It's like a protocol. It's a set of things that we explore. And that's part, we've thought through it. We really believe in this work. I believe that any therapist who wants to enhance a big part of what they're doing with clients could take their modalities. That could be IFS, that could be CBT, do hypnosis first, and do whatever they're going to do anyways for the rest of the session. And they're going to get a completely different flavor of session. And I've written about this. Like, I really would love to see a lot more hypnosis incorporated broadly in therapy because I think it would allow everything to happen so much quicker.
Right. Cause it's really about getting past, it sounds like it's really about getting past that sort of like intellectual blocker, like that filter. Aldous Huxley, the author, right, would talk about this sort of aspect of our mind where so much of it is really just acting as a filter and it blocking out like so much. What resonates with what you're saying is it's really about like getting to the core experience of like a deeper level where it's below the sort of level thoughts in some bad, I don't know if I'm expressing that properly, but where it's a deeper level. And then once you're there, it just opens up like a plethora of opportunities of different ways that you could take it. Right. And so some people might take it in a particular athletic performance direction. Other people might take it to better understand their own emotions and their reactions and why do they keep having the same reaction to a triggering event. Right.
Yeah.
But it sounds like there's sort of that, it's like, okay, how do we get to that zone? And once we're in that zone, it's like, okay, then there's a lot of different opportunities of what we could work on.
Exactly. To me, the biggest advantage is the silencing of the critical mind. We start out as children and being very spontaneous beings, very uninhibited.
Mhm.
We do what we want when we want it. And then the process of adulthood, of growing up, is society and our parents teaches us, well, you gotta ask yourself if this is an appropriate time to cross the street. And you get
Mhm.
more and more of that piling on. I remember reading in a book somewhere, a guy asked a first grader, who here is an artist? And everybody raised their hand. And by the time you get to sixth or eighth grade, you get like one person in the room who's like a theater geek, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that concept of criticizing yourself, like, is this good enough? Is this, and
Yeah.
what I'm doing okay, is a natural part of becoming a adult. And it's important. You need it to not get hit by a car and to, wake up on time and go to work. But we vastly exaggerate it. It becomes the only way that we then
Mhm.
operate. And achieving balance between, if you will, the oversimplification, left brain, right brain kind of bit, where we're so left brained a lot of the time, where we're just analyzing, is this the right thing? Is this the right thing? Am I allowed to do this now? And in the world of our emotions and the world of decisions and creativity and stuff like that, that does not serve us at all.
Mhm.
You're not going to create change from that place. And if you do, it's going to be very slowly and very painfully. And there's much better ways of acting from it. I give the analogy, most change people try to do is like arguing with a 3-year-old. Because you've got a 3-year-old still living inside of you. It's eternal inner child. And this inner child wants X, Y, and Z right now, right? It wants it right now. And no amount of you, if you've ever had an argument with a 3-year-old, you know what happens. The 3-year-old always wins, and if somehow you brute force it, so the 3-year-old has lost, everybody's
Bad
crying.
idea.
You're
Yeah.
crying and they're crying. And that is so much of how personal growth looks like these days. You
Yeah.
either they've won or everyone's crying. And
Right.
so there is a way to talk to 3-year-olds. Again, anyone who's parent of a 3-year-old knows this. And it's illogical. It's got its own logic. It's cyclical, but you have to talk that way. And when you do, you can get almost instantaneous responses. It's fascinating, right? You talk to the 3-year-old like the 3-year-old wants to be spoken to. For example, validation. Oh, you really want this chocolate right now and you can't have it, right? And they cry extra. It actually happens. They cry more and then they move on. And this
Yeah.
happens time and time again with clients that I'm working with, right? That thing just emerges that way. Uh, one of my favorite stories I heard recently um, speaks to this internal logic that 3-year-olds have and we have for ourselves. Really, is somebody asked a 3-year-old, "How come the tooth fairy um, doesn't build a house out of bricks? How come she builds her house out of teeth?" Right? So why did you need to do that? And the 3-year-old answered, because nobody has bricks in their mouth. And so, of course, you have to build it
Great
out of
answer.
teeth, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that speaks to how so much of what we're doing in our lives, right? In our in our mind, nobody has bricks in their mouths, and that's why you're doing what you're doing. And sometimes all you
Totally.
need to do is make a little suggestion to upgrade the loop,
Oh,
and everybody is going to be in a much better place and move past whatever it is that they've been stuck in symptoms for years.
amazing. That's really fascinating. Okay, so there's a lot that we're going to continue digging into in the future. A lot there, a lot of really insightful thing into this whole world of hypnosis. So yeah, we look forward to more. This is great.
Thank you,
Um,
Brad.
Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, I've learned an incredible amount. Hopefully everybody else. And yeah, we'll continue going, digging deeper and sort of navigating all the different channels of hypnosis, because I think it sounds like, I think more people would love to have that experience that you described, right? And I think it can be really powerful for helping connect people to this world, this inner world that they do want to discover, but they don't know how because of that 3-year-old.
Exactly.
That's right inside. So amazing. Okay. Sounds
Thank you,
good.
Brad.
We'll,
Thanks for
we'll
having me on.
continue from there. Definitely.
Yeah.